Hey everyone, so this is my week one wrap up video. Every week, I typically, after the assignments and knowledge checks are in, I put together a short wrap up video where I go over to my keyboard. So, in a moment, I'm going to go to my keyboard and go over a few things in Python based on feedback that you give me in the knowledge checks, as well as when it comes to assignments. If I notice there are things that people are getting wrong, I'll typically go over those things as well. And so let me go over to my keyboard and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so just a couple things came up in the feedback for Knowledge Check 1. And there were a couple questions I got last week that I just want to go over as well. So first, there was someone that had kind of mentioned that in the first hands-on video, I asked you to open up this Jupyter intro file, and they weren't sure if this is the same file we'll be using the entire semester. So I just want to make it clear, every kind of hands-on video grouping, there's a separate worksheet. So for week one, there was the Jupyter intro, and then there was also this O2 data types pandas worksheet. It'll tell you at the beginning of the hands-on video which file to be working from. Basically, in the summer, I'm cramming, for many of the weeks, 2 weeks worth of content into a single week because we're only meeting for 6 weeks. So in a regular semester, this would have been week one, this would have been week two, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so there are multiple different worksheets throughout the semester. And just in case you didn't notice, in Jupyter Hub, I do post the solution files as well. Okay, so that you can have access to those. Something that came up, let me just run a little bit of code here. Let me scroll down here. So the first question that came up had to do with this norm.cdf function. Some of you kind of asked me over email. I did have a note in the Canvas page for this hands-on video, but some of you kind of pointed out this np.float thing. In the videos, it just gives the number, right? But when you run this, and when I run this now, I get np.float64. If this were an integer, it would be npint64. The 64 just means 64 bits of memory. You don't need to worry about that. And in fact, you don't really need to worry about this whole thing. This is a change that was made after I filmed the videos. And it's really just a display thing to tell you the type of number that is the result of this function, okay? It doesn't change functionality at all. Like I could do this plus, 1, and then I get 1.1586, right? So it's going to treat it as a number, but it is, this function now is kind of wrapping it in this indicator of the data type, okay? A float obviously is a number with decimals. An int is an integer that's a whole number, okay? So I wanted to point that out. The other thing that came up, and I did send an announcement out about this, but just in case it wasn't clear, let me come down here to pandas. So in pandas, let me load in this data set. Okay, and we can look at the data set. And when we do df.dtypes, in the video, for anything that pandas is not sure what the data type is, in the video, it actually shows it as an object. Again, literally in the last 2 months, there's been an update to pandas, and it looks like now, as long as that thing does not have NAs, it's being read in as a string. So column C and column D, these are now being read in as a string, whereas in the video, if you watch the video, I think it would have said object for columns C and D. So that's a little bit of a change. To be honest with you, I like that they've made this change because honestly, an object is treated in Python as if it's a string. And so we might as well just call it a string. It does look like column B, it's being read in as an object still. And I think that's because there are some missing values. NaN stands for not a number. It stands for missing value, basically. And so what I think now happens with the dtypes method is, obviously, if you can identify the data type, so like column A, it sees that that's a whole number, and it's calling that an integer. Again, the 64 just means 64 bits of memory. Column E, it's looking at that and saying, aha, that's a float. Again, 64 just being 64 bits of memory. And it looks like if it's reading something in and it doesn't know what the data type is and there are NAs, it's going to read that as an object. But as I mentioned in the video, it's basically going to treat objects as strings. And then anything that gets read in that, again, it can't figure out what the data type is and there are no missing values, it's just going to read those in as strings. Okay. Now, in week 3, next week, we're getting into feature engineering, where we can actually change the data type. So for instance, when it comes to column C, this is being read in as a string. Well, what if I want to be able to do some math with this, right? What if I want to subtract this date from that date? Right now, I wouldn't be able to do that because they're just being read as strings. It's as if I took the word hello minus the word goodbye. Python wouldn't know what to do with that. But if we reclassify column C instead of a string as a date, then we can actually do math. Then I can take 5/4/2020 minus 3/13/2020, and it'll actually give me the number of days between those two dates. Okay, so that's what we're going to get into when we get to feature engineering, which again is in next week's material. Okay, so I just want to cover that. It's a difference that occurred literally between in the spring when I taught this class, this was not happening. So this is literally something that's just occurred. It's a change that's just happened in the past 2 months. Apparently, I'm going to have to re-record these videos. Between this thing here and now this, there are enough changes. I think I'm probably going to re-record the videos, but these are all minor details. They shouldn't impact the functionality in any way. So hopefully that doesn't get in your way. If it does, or if you're confused about this, please just reach out to me. But honestly, it's not going to happen too much, and I don't think that any of these little differences will impact us in any meaningful way when it comes to reading in data and trying to do a little bit of analysis and building models. We're really going to be treating strings and objects the same way. If it's really not a string or an object like this, then we want to change it to what it is. In this case, it's a date. This, however, that is truly a string, so we would keep that as is. Okay, so that's something we're going to get into next week. Someone had mentioned that they were having issues, like if they kind of came in and tried to run a command like this norm.cdf. Let me do -2. Okay, so let's say let me restart the kernel here. And let's say that you now try to run this. I'm going to get an error message. Okay. And someone said that was happening to them and they had to go back and like rerun code. And now all of a sudden this works. And all that has to do with is I'm guessing your Jupyter Hub timed out. So there is a time, I think it's like 5 minutes or so. If you walk away from Jupyter for like 5 minutes, it's going to time out. And when it times out, unfortunately, what that means is when you restart, anything that you ran previously, you're going to have to rerun. Okay, so when it times out and you restart, it doesn't have all of this stuff stored in memory. So you kind of have to go back up to the top and restart. Now, as you notice, this little circle, that restarts the kernel. So if for some reason I'm running my code, and let's say I get an error or it's running and running and running and I'm not getting a result, I can always come up here. This is to stop, but you can always click this and it restarts the kernel. This right here restarts the kernel and runs all the cells. So that's very helpful. Like if you were like all the way down here and I had filled in everything, I don't necessarily want to go one by one to rerun every line of code. And so what this does is it restarts the kernel and then just runs all of the code cells until it gets to an error, basically. If it gets to an error, it stops. And at that point, you kind of have to go forward. Okay, so I wanted to point that out as well. Someone did ask me, they were sort of like how do I know what packages? And in the video, I'd kind of mentioned, well, you just kind of have to Google stuff. And they said, I get that, but it's felt a little unsatisfactory. And I'll just tell you, it is open source. So there are a ton of packages, a ton of functions that are out there. Some are more frequently used than others. So like when we get to building our models, the packages we're going to be using to build our models are some of the most commonly used packages. And once you start using them, those are the packages you use, right? There's always documentation for those packages in case you want to kind of go deeper. So for instance, with inferential modeling with linear regression, we're going to use a package called stats models. Again, one of the most commonly used packages when it comes to inferential modeling. And then when we get into predictive modeling or machine learning the following week, we're going to be using functions from the scikit package, which again, probably the most commonly used package for those types of machine learning models. Okay, so the response I'd give you if you're a little concerned about like how do I know what packages is once you start using Python for some of the most commonly done things, performed actions, there are packages that you're just going to learn the first time you do them, and then those are the packages you're just going to keep learning. Now, it does bring you to the question, well, what if this is truly the first time I'm doing something and I'm not in DA3 and I don't know how to do it? Okay, and I had mentioned Google, and I do think that that's totally a way to go is, you could try to Google, saying I'm in Python, I'm trying to do this thing. What's the package? I'd also say these days AI tools are great for that. And actually these days I'd probably say go to an AI tool, go to ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot, and literally type that in. I'm working in Python, I've built my model, but I want to do this with my model. I'm not quite sure how to do it. And it will give you some sample code. Okay, now you always have to be careful. We all know AI hallucinates. There are a couple assignments later this semester where I'll ask you to use AI and kind of think about the output it's giving you and how trustworthy it is. But it typically gets you 80% of the way there. It's typically a really good first start. You want to be critical, but you also, it is usually getting you most of the way there. And so I would say that that's a great way to figure out, like, if you've never done something, you're not quite sure what the package is or whatever, go to AI, ask the question, see what it gives you. Okay. Let me see. What else did I want to go through here? Someone had just mentioned when it comes to dates, it's tough to remember that Monday is 0. I agree with you. First of all, it's annoying that Python starts counting at 0. And why is it Monday and not Sunday? And let me see. Actually, now that I think about it, I think it is 0 is Sunday. Let me just see here. Bear with me. Yeah, Monday is 0. Yes. That's the way they wrote it. Okay. And so we can try to look up who wrote this and send them a a sternly worded email saying, why did you do that to us? That's partly, though, why when we get into feature engineering next week with pandas, there's the toDateTime function, which we're going to actually use most often throughout the semester. And the nice thing about that is it has a method called dayname and month name. But day name, we can use that and it actually gives us the day of the week. It doesn't give us a number. So I do think that in practice, using the pandas function to_datetime is probably the most straightforward way of working with dates. And that's mostly what we're going to do throughout the semester. Okay. Someone had asked when it is best to use each coding language. So in DA1, you learned R. In DA2, you learned SQL. DA3, you're now learning Python. And the question was, when do we use each one? Okay. Well, I will tell you, SQL is a little bit different. So R and Python have a lot of overlap. And hopefully throughout the semester, you'll kind of notice the overlap. I do try to point out in the videos where there's overlap and similarity as well as differences. So R and Python, let me hold that for a second because it's not so clear cut when you use one versus another. SQL, however, is a very specific coding language for working with databases. And so really, if you're working with a database and you're trying to pull information from a database, you're going to be using SQL. It's a structured query language. You're literally querying, you're asking the database for information. Okay, so that's a kind of special case, and I would say SQL, you're going to use it with a database. I will say that there are packages both in Python and R that allow you to connect to databases and run SQL queries from within your R or Python script, but you're still using SQL to query the database. Now, when it comes to R versus Python, um, it's partly like a stylistic difference and preference. I will tell you that initially R was what people typically were using for data analytics. And so what that means is that there's a lot of powerful functionality when it comes to analytics in R. Whereas Python, people have used that to create video games. I mean, it's a very versatile computing language that's used for lots of other things besides just data analytics. However, people have created packages to allow all of us to be able to do data analytics from within Python. And I would say that Python has very much caught up with R in terms of having the functions and packages available to do sophisticated analytics. So it's really kind of if you're trying to decide like what do you want to pursue after this semester, do you want to be an R person? Do you want to be a Python person? Part of it is wherever you work, if this is your job, what languages are they using, right? There are some places that prefer Python, some places that prefer R. Um, I will say that I know that for some analytics that are done for governmental agencies, they're very particular about the language they want you to use because of security. And that sometimes there are issues with like open source being too unsecure. So you want to be driven partly by what the context is, right? If your business uses Python, then you probably should learn Python. If that's not the driving force, then I would just say, which language do you enjoy learning more? Again, I will say that Python is more versatile in that it can do a lot of things that R can't. Like you would never really use R to create a computer game, right? Whereas Python, you could do something like that. If we think about like generative AI models, they're very, very complex, but a lot of that's driven off of like Python, right? Those things really aren't being written in R. So I would say that more and more people are kind of gravitating towards Python. But I think the reason we're kind of teaching you all three is so that you have a little bit of familiarity with all three. So that let's say you go for a job interview somewhere, or you're up for a promotion and you've been using Python, and all of a sudden someone says, "Oh, well, on our team we're going to be using R." You won't be starting from scratch. That's kind of the point. And so that's what I would encourage you to think about. Which language do you prefer? But it is good that you're getting exposure to all three. Okay. The last thing I'll point out, let me come over to Canvas for this. First of all, I'll just point out, if you didn't notice, as I publish material, so this is next week, this is the week after, I do make these links go live so that you can access the material directly from these links. And so, for instance, this upcoming Monday, the 13th, Knowledge Check 2 and Assignment 1 are due. I've posted the next assignment and Knowledge Check, which will be due the following week. And then, again, the next assignments, which will be due the following week, et cetera, et cetera. So right now, I have the course published through week 4. It's a 6-week course, so we don't have too much left, but you can certainly work your way ahead. Someone had mentioned that they wish that there was like a single reference guide. And so I want to first of all point out, anywhere where there's a hands-on video in Canvas, if you didn't notice, at the very bottom, I put any of the key functions from those videos, okay, along with like an explanation of what those are. So like, here's the next one. If you scroll down, here we go. And so my recommendation is come over to Jupyter Hub, open up a new file, and as you're going through, just, copy and paste stuff, right? So, I can Command C, come over here, and we can make this into a markdown file or markdown cell, and Command V to paste. Okay. And then I can add another cell. And similarly with this next one, again, let me try that again. Command C to copy and come over here, and we'll turn that into a markdown. Command paste. Okay. And, I would just recommend do this as you go along. And then certainly you can like add code cells above. So, you could kind of put in notes to yourself. The following are date time functions, right? Um, just kind of put notes in here. And so as you go along, kind of create your own cheat sheet. And remember for the, or I'm saying remember, you may not know this yet. For the final exam, you have access to Jupyter Hub. You'll have access to your notes. So you can certainly use these notes. And I think it's nice to have everything in one spot rather than having to remember like what week, what hands-on video document that thing comes from. And so I highly recommend keep a running tally, and over here I could go ahead and save this as, instead of entitled, code cheat sheet. Okay. And there I've got my code cheat sheet. I prefer this to be the way you do it versus me just give you a cheat sheet because I think it helps you learn. Okay. I have found that if I just simply give you like a 5-page PDF document that has all of the code from the entire course, for some people that's overwhelming, first of all. And you're not really learning anything. And so it really does become a game during exams of hunting and pecking for the right thing. Whereas when you're creating it as you go along and putting notes to yourself, and maybe even putting like examples, right? You could, add another code cell and, load in a data set and have some examples that you want to kind of to practice, right? I think that that's a better way of internalizing some of this stuff. And remember, I'm not expecting you to memorize stuff necessarily. By the time we get to the final exam, we'll have covered a lot of code. And so it's totally unrealistic for me to think that you would memorize stuff. And I wouldn't. So I'm expecting that you are able to work with the code that we've covered. And so I think having a guide that you create for yourself with your own notes and your own examples is a good way of making sure that when it comes test time and I give you a different data set, you'll know how to apply the code that we've covered to those particular data sets that I give you. Okay, so that would be my recommendation as you go along. Okay, hopefully you found that helpful. So for week 2, the week that we're currently in, there's 2 things due this upcoming Monday. Knowledge Check 2, remember you get 2 attempts on that. I take the highest score. And then the first assignment, the first coding assignment, where I give you a bike share data set from Seoul, South Korea, and I ask you to do a little bit of data profiling. Okay, that's due this upcoming Monday. Now remember, you can turn things in late. I have a no questions asked late policy. There is a 10% late penalty for every day something is due past the due date, up to 5 days. So the lowest you would get is 50% off. I kind of stopped the late penalty at that point. But I will say when it comes to the coding assignments as well as the connections exercises, I cap those in terms of the lateness at 5 days. So in other words, this first assignment is due this upcoming Monday. The assignment actually closes the following Sunday. Okay, so if you want to get credit, I recommend, first of all, getting it in before Monday so you don't even have a late penalty. But if you have to be late, you do need to get it in by the following Sunday. That's when the assignment closes, and I will no longer take late assignments after that date. And that's mostly because the following Monday, I want to publish the solution file along with the grades. And so it's not really fair for the solutions to be out there and then to allow someone to complete that assignment. So just be aware when it comes to the assignments, the coding assignments, as well as the connections exercises, you can turn those in late with the penalty, but they're only open for 5 days and then they close. So you do have kind of a ticking sort of clock when it comes to those assignments. The knowledge checks you can submit whenever, although again, there's a late penalty. But if you're a week and a half late on your knowledge checks, I still do recommend go in and do it so you can at least get the 50% credit on it. Okay, those remain open, but the assignments and the exercises do not. Okay. Another note, it's in the assignment, the announcement that's coming out on Monday, but I'll just give you the heads up as well. Next week, I have a conflict with our normal office hours times. So next Wednesday and Thursday instead of being online in the evening, I'll actually be online from 2 to 3 p.m. on Wednesday and Thursday on Zoom. So if you want to stop in on office hours next week, I'll be there 2 to 3 p.m. on Zoom. Otherwise, just send me an email. I check my email pretty frequently, so I can always respond to any questions or issues you might have over email. Okay? Great. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.